"Got a report about a car up on Makeout Point," said Sheriff Rodney. He leaned forward, tapping my desk. He was an older man, with a thick beard that was more salt than pepper, and the most worn-looking face you had ever seen. "I need you to go check it out." I rolled my eyes. I was always getting tagged in for this sort of work. In my opinion, it was because I was the only one in the station that was a woman. They liked sending the little boring jobs my way so they could sit around the station and watch football. I had grown up in this town, so it wasn't as though it came as a huge surprise. I knew that things were always going to be an uphill battle. Small towns always tried to hold on to their prehistoric ways, no matter how out of date they might have been. "Yeah, I've got it." I grabbed my keys and left. I wasn't too put out about having an excuse to get up and stretch my legs some. Unlike most of the cops that I worked with, I actually enjoyed being up and getting something done.
Blackford Police Department.
The cruiser that I drove was on the older side, but the overhead lights and the siren worked just fine. I flipped them on as I cruised through the city, then turned them back off when I hit the dirt road that led to Makeout Point. It was a part of Farmer Bill Watson's property, but no one gave that any mind. Bill Watson had a huge amount of land. So long as no one was giving him or his cattle a hard time, he didn't care if the kids came out here and tried to get away from their parents for a while. Half the time, he didn't even realize it. The hill itself was a good distance away from anything that might have been lit up. All the local teenagers liked to go park up there and try to get lucky. We only bothered to get involved when the parents threw a fit. I wondered who I would be breaking up today. One of the football boys, no doubt. Maybe a church mouse, too. It was night, and the moon was full above me. I drove up the hill, soon able to spot the car. It was parked and totally still. The headlights clicked on, twin beams that cut through the darkness. I parked at the foot of the hill and grabbed my flashlight, starting up. As long as the teenagers weren't disrespectful, I would send them off with just a warning. I was halfway up the hill when I heard a strange sound. Metal that was being scraped over metal. Was the girl keying the car? That never bode well. I picked up my steps, hurrying the rest of the way to the top of the hill. My boots thumped dully against the ground with each step taken. My flashlight caught on the back of the car first. I could see only one figure inside, swaying slightly. It looked to be Carly Min. I hurried over to the passenger door and knocked on the window. Her head snapped up. She was sobbing. "Officer Reynolds!" The passenger door was thrown open with such force that it nearly slammed into me. The next thing I knew, Carly was throwing herself at me. "He's dead," she sobbed. "He's dead." "What are you talking about? Carly, are you hurt?" I put my hands on her shoulders and pushed her back just slightly, taking her in. She was trembling from head to toe, had a lost, glossy look in her eyes, but didn't look hurt. "The man with the hook hand!" she wailed, sinking down onto her seat once more. "He killed Kyle!" "Get in the car," I told her firmly, "and lock the doors." I waited to make sure she was going to listen to me, and then started around the front of the car. The twin headlights cast a strange glow on my body. There was a long line in the metal where something had been scraped over the hood of the car, and then further around to the side of it. I rounded the front and gasped. The line continued to split through the paint, all the way to the driver's door. There, it looked as though someone had taken something sharp, like a screwdriver, and slammed it into the metal over and over again, puncturing it. But the damage that had been done to the car wasn't the worst part. That would have been Kyle Stratton, on the ground on his back, covered in blood. There was a metal hook, the sort that someone might have worn on their wrist, jammed into his eye. Blood ran down over his face, but that wound was nothing. Not compared to the rest of him. His throat had been ripped open, and so had his stomach. It had been split, torn into, as though someone had tried to reach into his guts and play with them. The smell of blood and death was so foul it had me gagging. I slammed a hand up, covering my mouth, and backed away from the body. "Chief," I said, using the radio on the front of my shirt to call into the station. "We've got a problem." The chief responded, "Can't you even break up a couple of kids without needing backup?" I could hear the rest of the station laughing in the background. "Chief, we've got a dead body." That sobered the man up. I gave him the information and then got the unsteady girl bundled off and secured in the back seat of my car. That was when I heard it. From behind us, I heard the faint but distinct rustling of leaves coming from the copse of trees on the side of the road, just beyond Kyle's still cooling body. It must be the killer, I thought, and without hesitation, I readied my service piece and advanced into the woods that surrounded Makeout Point. As my feet crunched over the fallen leaves, I strained my ears to listen for any more signs of this maniac. Once I had advanced far enough into the forest that the road was no longer visible, was when I first noticed the fog developing on the ground. With each tree I passed, it seemed to grow and spread, covering the area in a foreboding miasma. With my visibility lessened, and thinking back to the mangled state of Kyle's body, my grip tightened on the gun. The fog seemed to have brought with it an oppressive sense of foreboding. But it was more than just a feeling. It became a tangible heaviness to the air. I coughed as a painful sensation of fullness began to fill my chest, my nasal sinuses, and the deepest channels of my ears, as if I had been stuck on an airplane and unable to pop my ears. I felt, more than heard, that something was nearby. I could feel it in my bones that it was something innately perilous, which made me instantly take notice of the complete and utter unnatural silence around me. Quiet, except for the faint ringing in my ears. A figure shrouded in the fog stepped out from behind a nearby tree, took 1, 2, 3 leisurely steps before striding into a moonbeam and turning to face me directly. It was a tall, gaunt-looking man with a ghastly grin spreading from ear to ear. The smile the only feature visible from underneath the wide brim of an old fraying hat. The moonlight glinted off of the exposed teeth, giving him a feral edge. Maybe it was the fog or the surprise of seeing the murderer so brazenly expose himself, but more likely the debilitating haze that seemed to weigh on me. But I felt shaky on my feet. Indeed, my hands began to tremble. I gazed at the figure in front of me and discovered I could not move closer to apprehend him. My legs leaded and anchored to the ground. He seemed to know this, and in a languid motion raised his right arm, the one that ended in a bloody stump, and seemed to inspect it, twisting it back and forth. Then the figure began to shake. A deep, guttural grunting came through a twisted snarl, and to my horror, I could make out that something was coming out of that stump. It emerged bit by bit, covered in the man's own blood, but whatever was beneath seemed to shine? After some exertion, the man seemed satisfied, wiping the newly grown appendage on his threadbare coat before raising his arm back into the air. It was a hook. It had grown a new hook. A wave of nausea hit me with a powerful force. My vision seemed to swim in front of me, but not enough to block out the advancing figure charging my way. Born out of innate self-preservation, I fired blindly, over and over until the chamber clicked empty. I hung my head. It felt too heavy to lift anymore, and readied for the inevitable blow. but none came. The only sound to be heard was the reverberation of gunfire ringing through the woods. But carried alongside it was the ominous cackle of a madman echoing in and out of the trees, but with no source in sight. With the figure's disappearance, so too did the maddening fog seem to lift. I felt like I could think clearly again, taking a moment to get my bearings before marching back to the squad car on stiff legs. I had to check on Carly. I had no idea how long I had been incapacitated or where that thing had gone. Had it somehow made it past me? With the fugue state I had been in, there was no way of telling. Rushing to the car, I could just make out Carly's silhouette from the back. She was as still as a statue. Dread pooled in my gut as I broke out into a run. As I ran alongside of the car, I looked desperately for the telltale signs of scratching damage, but the siding was intact. The door handle clear. I wrenched open the door and found Carly just as I'd left her, clutching the emergency blanket tightly and looking up at me with wide, bleary eyes. My sigh of relief was audible, with just a hint of hysteria mixed in with it. She was safe. Just then, the flashing lights of my backup spilled onto the scene. To their credit, the whole department had shown up. Even the chief managed to pull himself away from the comfort of the office. We searched the whole property, but we couldn't find anyone. I tried to explain the encounter in the woods to my fellow officers, but they brushed me off, citing an overactive imagination. I expected no different. Simply too old and too set in their ways to have their understanding of the world upended. But I know what I had seen. Once the preliminary sweep was completed and the scene cordoned off, I asked if I could escort Carly home. I needed to make sure she would be safe. But as we pulled into her driveway and my headlights illuminated the front of her house, we both gasped. Gouged deep into the wood of her front door was a bloody hook, the moonlight glinting off of the steel.
Subscribe today or beware.